Don't you just love a horror movie that has a truly bleak ending? Just me? Okay, right, well, I will talk to a therapist about that. No, but sometimes you get horror movies that have original ideas that for whatever reason just didn't quite make it to screen. Perhaps test audiences didn't like it, perhaps somewhere in the scripting process it just sort of fell apart. This is a list of movies that, whatever you think you saw and whatever you think affected you, it was once upon a time so much darker. I'm Sean Ferrick for What Culture Horror, and here are 10 horror movies that originally had a much darker ending. Number 10, Leatherface. Serving as a prequel to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, 2017's Leatherface didn't exactly wow the critics. Much of the movie's criticism came from its overly sanitized tone, which made the movie feel at odds with the disturbing grindhouse atmosphere of the original movie. Had the movie kept its original ending, however, this particular critique would have been harder to justify. In the movie's original cut, final girl Elizabeth Lizzie White is swiftly decapitated by Leatherface's infamous weapon of choice. Horrible, yes, but when you remember the brutality of the eponymous villain inflicted on his victims in the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you could almost argue Leatherface was being merciful in granting Lizzie a quick death, especially when you see her fate in the alternate ending. In this deleted scene, the camera pans around to Elizabeth's body, stuck in a meat hook, missing a leg and having had the skin around the lower half of her face pulled off to make Leatherface's mask. The worst part is she's still alive to suffer through all this. This gruesome, inhumane treatment of his victims is far more in character with the Leatherface of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and would have gone some way to silencing critics of the prequel's relatively lighter tone, with heavy emphasis on the word relatively. Number 9, Dawn of the Dead. The original Dawn of the Dead is rightly seen as one of the greatest horror movies of all time, but it's interesting to think how it would be perceived today if the film had kept its horrifically dark original ending. The Dawn of the Dead that horror fans have come to know and love over the past 45 years sees surviving protagonists Peter and Fran make their escape on a helicopter, but in the movie's original ending, the chopper served a far darker purpose. As reported by Screen Rant, in Romero's original script, Peter simply gives up and blows his brains out. This leads to Fran becoming overwhelmed with despair, ending her own life by inserting her head between the spinning helicopter blades, just as she was on the cusp of freedom. These needless deaths would have led to a far darker movie, and arguably a worse one. Peter and Fran's escape from them all is one of the most triumphant moments in horror movie history, and without it, Dawn of the Dead would be just another bleak, post-apocalyptic zombie movie. Number 8, Carrie, 2013. The original Carrie has one of the all-time great endings. Even knowing it's coming, your heart will still skip a beat when Carrie's hand raises from the grave in one of cinema's greatest jump scares. The 2013 remake, by way of contrast, simply ends with Carrie's tombstone cracking. A pale riff on the original movie, the remake's disappointing ending is an apt summation of why it's largely forgotten in modern movie discourse. Things could have been very different, however, if the movie studio had been brave enough to go with the remake's original ending. The remake was meant to end with Carrie's classmate Sue dreaming that she was giving birth, except instead of a beautiful bouncing baby, Sue's natal exertions resulted in Carrie's bloodied arm emerging from her former classmate's birth canal. Carrie's viscera-soaked hand then grabbed Sue's arm, in a neat callback to the original movie, while Sue understandably screamed her head off. The reveal was that it was all a dream does nothing to diminish the disturbing nature of the scene, and it's baffling as to why it was left out. Maybe the studio thought they were doing everyone a favour by protecting them from the thousands of tuck to the hand memes that would have surely followed. Number 7, 1408. From one Stephen King movie to another, 1408 is a decent enough yarn that tells the tale of Mike Enslin, a paranormal investigator who, following his daughter's death, desperately investigates reported supernatural sightings in the hopes of finding proof of the afterlife. In the movie's original ending, Enslin, having spent most of the movie trapped in the eponymous haunted room 1408, burns it down to free the ghosts trapped there, before making a last-minute escape alongside a recording of his deceased daughter's voice talking to him from the other side. This discovery allows Enslin to move on with his life, and also repairs his relationship with his wife in true Hollywood fashion. The ending shown to test audiences, however, was much more bittersweet. In this version of the film, Mike dies in the fire that he started, but achieves a victory of sorts when the fire both frees the ghosts trapped in room 1408 and allows him to join his daughter in the afterlife, a fact made explicitly clear when his ghost walks towards his daughter's voice in the final shot of the movie. Honestly, it's hard to see why test audiences were so down on this ending. The horror genre is the wrong place to look for unreservedly happy endings, and as Alan Wake recently reminded us, the heroes in a horror story seldom win without great sacrifice. Number 6. Hostel. The first Hostel movie is already an uncomfortable spectacle, with Eli Roth's tale of dismemberment, murder and suicide guaranteed to turn all but the most cast iron of stomachs. But the original ending left audiences feeling queasy for reasons beyond simple violence, as it turned the movie's hero into just as much of a monster as the psychotic millionaires who murdered his friends. The Hostel that was released in cinemas saw sole survivor Paxton track down and murder the businessman who killed his friend Josh in a brutal but understandable act of revenge. Roth's original ending, however, saw Paxton opt to emotionally torment his adversary by kidnapping his daughter. In the original script, Paxton even went as far as to slit the girl's throat, but in the version that was filmed, he merely absconds with her. Test audiences hated the ending, feeling that Paxton's abduction of an innocent girl was a heel turn too far for the supposed hero of the movie, and that it made the movie's villain too sympathetic. Having spent most of the movie firmly establishing the divide between the good guys and the bad guys, Hostel's last-minute decision to blur the lines was an unnecessary wrinkle in the story, and one that felt wholly out of place with the knowingly straightforward grindhouse nature of the film. Number 5. Happy Death Day. Given the time-bending premise behind Happy Death Day, wherein the improbably named Tree Gelbman finds herself stuck in a Groundhog Day-style loop, except each day ends with her brutal murder, it's somewhat ironic that the original ending found test audiences feeling like the entire movie had been a waste of their time. Happy Death Day's original ending is a perfect fit for its PG-13 rating, as Tree takes a leaf, out of Bill Murray's book by breaking free of her time loop, getting the guy and becoming a much better person than she was before the loop began. As endings go, it's a crowd pleaser. Simple, straightforward, and satisfying. The alternate ending, not so much. During the course of the movie, it's made clear that Tree's repeated deaths are taking a physical toll on her body, and that if she dies one time too many, she'll be killed off for real. This comes into play during the film's unused climactic scene, where a hospital-bound Tree, having successfully dealt with her killer, is confronted by the wife of the college professor she's been sleeping with. Said wife then brutally murders Tree while the latter lies in bed, and the movie ends with the implication that this was Tree's last life. As reported by Looper, test audiences were beyond pissed that Tree's trials and tribulations ultimately led to nothing, leading to the canon ending where Tree gets to celebrate her happy life day. Number 4. You're Next. 2011's You're Next offered a neat inversion to the standard home invasion formula. In this particular film, it's the protagonist who is the deadliest person in the movie, not the masked killers hunting her. You're Next sees its heroine, Erin, dispatch her assailants via a series of brutal and bloody traps over the course of the film's runtime. By the end of the movie, audiences are left in no doubt that Erin is capital A Alpha, which likely explains why the filmmakers never even bothered to shoot the movie's alternate ending. This version of You're Next would have finished with Erin being instantly anticlimactically shot in the head by a police officer who arrived on the scene just as Erin had finished mopping up the last of the bad guys. Such a pointless, frustrating death for one of horror cinema's most capable protagonists would have been eye-poppingly, expletive-inducingly frustrating to witness, and it's understandable why it was never filmed. Knowing this does, however, make it easier to feel less guilty about laughing over the poor cop's fate in Your Next actual ending, where he blunders into one of Erin's traps and gets butchered by a falling axe. It wasn't manslaughter, Erin simply shot, or in this case dismembered, first. Number 3. Alien. Alien is unquestionably one of the greatest horror movies ever made, but it's unlikely that it, and the franchise as a whole, would have been as highly regarded today had Ridley Scott gone with his original script. In an interview with Entertainment Weekly, Scott revealed that Alien had a much bleaker ending in its first draft, with sole survivor Ripley's iconic harpoon trap failing to pay off. This results in the eponymous xenomorph swiftly dispatching the franchise's biggest star, before imitating Dallas's voice, yes, really, and sending off a distress call to lure in more victims. As well as preempting the Predator's iconic imitation tricks by a whole 8 years, this ending would have been disastrous for the Alien franchise. Much of the series' popularity comes from the 1986 sequel, and without Sigourney Weaver's bravura performance as the battle-hardened Ellen Ripley, there's no way Aliens would have become the pop culture milestone it is today. The Alien franchise may have had more bad movies than good, but a world without aliens would have been a poorer one indeed. Number 2, The Descent US version. Who could forget the ending to The Descent? After escaping from a monster-infested cave system, protagonist Sarah reaches her car and starts driving to safety, only to be startled by a hallucination of one of her deceased companions. For American viewers, that's where the story ended. For British audiences, however, there was one final twist of the knife waiting in store. In the UK version of The Descent, the movie continues after Sarah's hallucination. There, it's revealed that Sarah didn't just imagine seeing her dead companion. She imagined the entire escape. The movie then ends with Sarah imagining her daughter appearing in front of her as she mentally retreats into fantasy while the monsters close in around her. The British ending is actually the original one, but in an interview with Vulture, director Neil Marshall explained that American test audiences felt that the revelation that Sarah never left the cave was too depressing, leading to it simply being left out of the final cut. Number 1, Evil Dead 2013. Whereas the official ending sees Jane Levy's Mia chainsaw her way to victory over her demonic adversary, director Fede Alvarez originally had a much more explosive ending in mind for her, as in the final seconds of the movie would have seen Mia literally explode in a shower of blood and guts. Alvarez revealed on Twitter that the original plan was for Mia to be attacked by the Taker of Souls, a demon who lives up to its ominous billing by possessing Mia's body, levitating her into the air, and psychically eviscerating the unfortunate heroine. Thankfully, original Evil Dead director Sam Raimi advised Alvarez that, after everything Mia overcomes in the movie, drug addiction, demonic possession, and dismemberment, she deserved a happy ending. Granted, it took a while for the message to sink in. Alvarez actually filmed another ending where the movie closes with the revelation that Mia is still possessed, but eventually he relented and gave one of horror movies' most courageous protagonists the moment of triumph she deserved.